I found this picture in an antique shop of a mother and a son, and I wanted to find out who it was. So I did. I'm going to tell you who they are, and then I'm going to show you how I figured it out. Then I'm going to show you another photo that really hit me hard, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Who was Aunt Ruth and her son? And who is the small child being buried in this home funeral that's not labeled? I'm about to tell you, so stick around. My name is James, and I've been a genealogist now for over 10 years, and I like to use the techniques that I've learned to find the people that are in vintage pictures, trinkets, artifacts, and even road signs, and then I like to tell their story. This picture was sitting on a desk in an antique booth of a shop called Revive Us Again in Chapel Hill, Tennessee. I'll post the link to their page down in the description below. It jumped out at me because it is a crystal clear picture, and they both look so happy. But what were their names? Where are they from? Where is the dad? Was there a dad? And did they live to old age? So many questions, so let's dive in. At first glance, there isn't much to go by. We have Ruth as a name, aunt being her relation to whoever owned this picture, and son. There's no names on the back. There's no location of a photography studio. You open it up, there's no details, there's nothing. So by itself, this isn't enough to go on. And this is often the case in our own family pictures. You find a box in grandma's house and you find one person and a single name. A lot of times, if you're not already familiar with your ancestors and family tree, you might have no idea who that is. But with context clues, there's a shot. Now, this picture was sitting beside a box in the same booth, and the box was full of family photos. There were dozens of pictures that were all similar with the same handwriting. Now, I had Ruth in the back of my mind while I looked through these pictures, and I found Velma, Martin, Charlie, Luther, LaDonna, Andy, and then Ruth. So now she's connected to this family, the Chapmans. Ruth and Beulah looked to be about the same age with Luther Loftus. I took a guess that they were sisters, or at least in-laws. I like to build a private tree in Ancestry to help get myself started. It helps me connect all of the pieces and make things make sense. When there's a whole bunch of different names floating around, it makes it a lot easier to see how they're all connected. And once you find out how they're connected, you can sometimes figure out who is in a picture without a name. Ruth and Beulah Chapman were sisters living in Jackson County, Tennessee. Here is Beulah in 1900, living with her family at 16 years old. Her father is Andrew Chapman, who we also have a picture of from the box, with this giant horse. This is more evidence that we're on the right track. In 1909, Beulah marries Luther Loftus, and in 1910, she is living with her family, including her brother Bryant and her sister Ruth. So if you like this video so far and want to hear me tell more stories about people in the pictures that I find, and if it helps you with your own family search, then please be sure to like and subscribe. All of your support is immensely appreciated and helps more than you know. Luther and Beulah show up way across the country in 1920, living in Fresno County, California. Luther is working as a driller in the oil fields, and they have 4 children, Bogle, Clifton, Frank, and Mildred. But let's fast forward 10 years to 1930. Beulah and Luther are in Orange County, California with the same 4 kids, but now they have roommates, Bryant, Irene, and Ruth Chapman, and Fred Reeves, who is 5 years old. Thankfully, we have plenty of evidence to indicate that Luther and Beulah of Orange County, California are the same Luther and Beulah of Jackson County, Tennessee. Because when we're working on our own family research, it can really throw a wrench in things when somebody moves so far across country. So, who is in the picture of Aunt Ruth and son? Well, using contextual clues based on census and marriage records, I would say it's Ruth Chapman and Fred Reeves. So now we've given a name to that little boy. Let's take a closer look at the 1930 census. Fred Reeves is 5. So can we be sure that this Fred with a different last name is Ruth's son? I found the answer on Find a Grave. And if you aren't familiar, or if you haven't seen any of my other videos, Find a Grave is one of a few giant databases of cemeteries and memorials that is based on contributions from volunteers who join the site. It is invaluable as a research tool. Ruth is found in Olivewood Cemetery in Riverside, California. But also, one researcher uploaded her obituary, saving me the time of having to find it myself. And it graciously lists her son and brother, Fred Reeves and Martin Chapman, respectively. Martin is important for what I found that made me shift gears in my research for this video, so we'll come back to him in just a bit. Ruth was married to Dan Kelly when she passed in 1961. She was only 55 years old. Here again, I'll say, and I've reiterated this point several times, is you cannot get too hung up on specific dates and ages, and even names. There are too many record-keeping errors throughout time, and even in modern day, to rule out a possible discovery just because 1 or 2 years or even 10 years is different. You have to look at everything as a full picture to make a decision. Moving on. In 1940, Fred would be about 15 years old. I find him listed as living in William P. Grimes School for Boys and Girls. It shows that he was born in Tennessee and was previously living in Hanford, California in 1935, which is where his uncle, Luther Loftus, became the sheriff. In 1940, Luther and Beulah also state that they were living in Hanford County in 1935. So yes, Fred Reeves Chapman in 1940 is our guy. He was registered for the draft in 1942 and was 18 years old, working at Douglas Aircraft Modification Center. He married Betty Jane Holybee in 1947. In 1950, he was working as an inspector at a plastic and metal factory. Now, I don't normally include details of folks after the 1950s. I feel like that's a good cutoff point for this kind of research. But I can say that he died in 2003 and is buried in Riverside, California, in the same cemetery as his mom, Ruth. Now, I will say, I think that it's pretty sweet that the mom and son in this photo that I found did live together for the rest of their lives and were buried in the same cemetery together. I think that's pretty nice. So I found all of this and decided to go back to the booth to see if I could find more pictures of Ruth and Fred. But that's not all I found when I went back. Somehow, I missed these pictures. This is a child's funeral with no name attached. Who is the child being buried, and who are the parents? There are several pictures here from that day. I will tell you that there is an additional photo of an open casket that I decided to leave out of this video. In general practice with the regular news, they don't show photos of deceased children, and I don't think I will either. It might even get into some issues with the YouTube terms and services, and suffice it to say that I have the picture, and it is pretty sad to look at. That said, it didn't take me very long to figure out who it was, since I had already built up a pretty sizable tree for this family of Chapmans. Remember when I said that Ruth's brother Martin was going to be important? In 1920, Martin is 16 years old, and he still lived at home with Ruth. He married Velma Hicks on March 1st, 1923. Martin's memorial on Find a Grave lists a son, Charlie Frank Chapman, who lived 1924 to 1929, which would be a 5-year-old boy. And from the picture of the open casket and the size of the casket in these pictures, that's probably him. One thing I do like to mention to people is to not always take everything on Find a Grave as absolute truth, because the information is user submitted and users are prone to errors that can happen. So try to double check what you find as much as possible. And in this case, this boy was buried in Dodson Branch Cemetery, which is also where Velma Hicks' parents are buried. He is in the same row as his grandparents, row 40. So the researcher who uploaded this grave to Find a Grave was right on the money. And here we can even see a comparison of when the family first put his stone is to what it looks like now. And here are some photos I was able to connect to Charlie from his short life that were also in the box and labeled well. Now, Charlie had a sister who was born after he died, Edith. Edith lived a long life all the way to January of this year, 2025. And I have a feeling that these photos belong to her because she's the only one with a bunch of photos of later in life from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I think these photos might have belonged to her originally. Now, I looked everywhere. And I looked hard to try to find the cause of death for Charlie. But unfortunately, there wasn't a death certificate recorded. I also couldn't find a newspaper article in the usual places that I look because that particular newspaper of that area doesn't have any copies available online after 1922. And we needed 1929. So I called the library, which is a good source of things that might not be online yet. And the great librarians there, they took a long look for me and they went into the back and their records stop at 1925 also. And then the local archives across the road from the library, their collection starts in the 1960s. So there is a pretty big gap in newspapers from that time. And it just so happens to be the year that we needed, where there was probably an obituary I couldn't find. I don't know what happened to Charlie, but it's pretty easy to see that his family loved him. And we have a rare opportunity to see pictures of him as they loved him while he was still alive, all the way back 100 years ago, from 1924 and 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. I can't imagine how difficult this was for everyone, but someone, presumably his sister, whom he never even met, kept his memory alive by carrying these photos of him through the next 100 years. And I guess now we'll be thinking of him too. I'm putting the link to Charlie's Find a Grave in the description down below. This box was a huge find with lots of pictures, lots of people, and lots of stories. There were too many to cover in one video, so be looking out for a part 2.